He was once a humble bus driver in Caracas, but today Nicolás Maduro sits in the presidential palace under siege. How did this quiet union activist become the embattled president of Venezuela? And with US warships on alert in 2025, why has ousting Maduro proved so difficult? Nicolás Maduro Moros was born on November 23, 1962, in Caracas, Venezuela. He grew up in a modest apartment in the working-class El Valle neighborhood of the capital, the only son in a family with leftist leanings. His father was an active labor organizer, and political talk filled their small apartment. As a boy, Maduro even got suspended from school for passionately defending the Cuban Revolution in class. As a teenager, he played music and baseball, but politics captivated him most. At Liceo José Ábalos Public High School, he ran for student body president and won. In assemblies, he would sometimes step up to the microphone to speak about students' rights. He didn't speak much, but what he did say was usually poignant, a former classmate remembered. Maduro never graduated from high school, opting instead to jump directly into activism and work. In his late teens, rather than attend university, Maduro traveled to Havana for training at an elite political school run by Cuba's Communist Party. There, between 1986 and 1987, he studied Marxist philosophy and Latin American history alongside fellow young leftists. He returned home energized just as Caracas was erupting in the Caracazo riots of early 1989. A bloody popular rebellion against austerity. Maduro witnessed soldiers and police brutally repressing protesters in the streets near his neighborhood, an experience that reinforced his revolutionary fervor. By 1990, at age 27, he was driving a bus for the Caracas metro, by day maneuvering crowded routes, by night organizing his co-workers. He helped found a new transit union and quickly rose to lead it, gaining a reputation as a burly, mustached organizer who could mobilize colleagues for better wages and conditions. Before Maduro ever met him, Hugo Chávez was already turning into a symbol for Venezuela's poor, a former army officer promising a Bolivarian revolution that would use oil money to challenge the old elites and stand up to the United States. From the bus depot, Maduro watched this figure rising on TV and felt something electric. In February 1992, Chávez, a fiery army lieutenant colonel, led a failed coup attempt against Venezuela's government and was sent to prison. Maduro was not involved in that coup, but he was inspired by Chávez's bold stand. Later that year, he quietly joined the clandestine Bolivarian circles that continued agitating for change. On November 27, 1992, during a second coup attempt by rebel military officers, Maduro actively mobilized people in the streets of Caracas in support of the uprising. That effort also failed, but through it, Maduro solidified his ties with Chávez's circle. In December 1993, Maduro visited the incarcerated Chávez to offer support, forging a personal connection with the charismatic rebel leader. He was joined by a young lawyer, Celia Flores, who was also campaigning for Chávez's release. She would later become Maduro's wife and closest political confidant. When Chávez was released in 1994, Maduro stood by him as a devoted civilian disciple of the Bolivarian Revolution. That December, Chávez invited Maduro onto the national leadership of his reorganized movement. In 1997, Maduro participated in forming the Fifth Republic movement, MVR, the new political party that carried Chávez to a landslide election victory in late 1998. Once Chávez took office in 1999, Maduro's rise accelerated. He helped draft a new constitution, then won a seat in the newly created National Assembly, and by 2005, the former bus driver was presiding over Parliament itself. When he moved on, his wife Celia Flores took over as Assembly President, cementing their status as a power couple at the heart of Chávez's movement. In 2006, Chávez made Maduro his foreign minister, thrusting him onto the world stage as chief diplomat of the Bolivarian Revolution. Maduro pushed new regional alliances like ALBA and courted controversial leaders from Libya, Zimbabwe, and Iran, loudly confronting Washington at every summit. A brief detention by US. Officials in New York only burnished his image at home as a combative enemy of American imperialism. Despite his Marxist image, Maduro cultivated a spiritual side. In 2005, he and Celia Flores quietly traveled to India to seek blessings from Guru Satya Sai Baba. And years later, Parliament even declared a day of mourning when the Guru died. Maduro called himself a Catholic inspired by Eastern teachings, and he spoke of Chávez in almost religious terms too. In 2014, the Socialist Party even introduced a modified Lord's Prayer that began, "Our Chávez who art in heaven," during a party congress. Venezuela's Catholic bishops condemned this as blasphemy, but Maduro defended the grassroots spiritual love for Chávez and accused the church of intolerance. He cultivated an almost religious reverence around Chávez's memory, which bolstered his own legitimacy among hardcore supporters. As Chávez's trusted foreign minister, Maduro's profile continued to grow. By 2011, President Chávez was gravely ill with cancer and began to prepare for the unthinkable. Within the inner circle, Maduro emerged as a leading contender to carry Chávez's torch, rivaled only by Diosdado Cabello, a powerful ex-military official. Maduro had a key advantage. He enjoyed the strong backing of Cuba's communist leadership, who were Chávez's close allies, whereas Cabello was favored by some in Venezuela's military ranks. In October 2012, after winning re-election for a fourth term, an ailing Hugo Chávez appointed Maduro as executive vice president. It was a clear sign of trust. At the same time, Celia Flores was serving as the country's attorney general, and together, she and Maduro were seen as the ultimate political power couple at the helm of the revolution. On December 8, 2012, Chávez went on national television, flanked by Maduro, and delivered what would be his final address. In a somber tone, he revealed that his cancer had returned and told Venezuelans explicitly that if he did not survive, they should vote for Nicolás Maduro to lead the nation. It was an emotional passing of the torch. Shortly afterward, Chávez flew back to Havana for surgery, and Maduro assumed many day-to-day duties in his absence. For weeks, the nation waited anxiously for news. Then, on March 5, 2013, Maduro appeared on state television with tears in his eyes to announce that Hugo Chávez had died. In that moment of sorrow, Maduro also hinted darkly that imperialist enemies had somehow poisoned Chávez and caused his illness. Now, as interim president, Maduro prepared to fulfill Chávez's last wish by running to succeed him. The presidential election was scheduled for April, barely 6 weeks after Chávez's death. Maduro hit the campaign trail as the fallen leader's anointed heir. On the campaign trail, Maduro branded himself as Chávez's faithful son. Chávez sets the route, Maduro takes the wheel, he liked to say, reminding crowds of his days as a bus driver. In one speech, he even claimed that a little bird had flown over his head, carrying Chávez's spirit, blessing his candidacy. Supporters found the story moving. Critics mocked it, but everyone understood the message. Maduro was asking voters to see Chávez in him. That mystical tale drew chuckles from skeptics, but many Chavistas found it moving, a sign that their comandante was still guiding Maduro from beyond. The vote on April 14, 2013, was far closer than anyone in the government expected. Maduro squeaked out a victory with just about 51% of the vote against roughly 49% for opposition candidate Enrique Capriles. The margin was only around 250,000 votes out of some 14 million cast. Capriles cried fraud and demanded a full recount. However, the electoral authority, still staffed by Chávez loyalists, audited a sample of paper receipts and declared Maduro the winner. Amid opposition uproar, Maduro was quickly sworn in as president on April 19th. Wearing the presidential sash and standing before the National Assembly, Maduro took the oath of office with a solemn pledge to continue Chávez's socialist project. It was a moment of triumph for him, the culmination of an unlikely journey from the Caracas bus depot to the Miraflores presidential palace. But it was also a moment of tension. Half the country celebrated what they saw as the preservation of Chávez's revolution, while the other half looked on in anger, convinced the election had been stolen. Venezuela was now deeply polarized, and Maduro was inheriting a troubled nation on the brink of an economic storm. Maduro's early months in power proved tumultuous. The global price of oil, Venezuela's lifeblood, was dropping, and government coffers were growing strained. In February 2014, barely a year into Maduro's term, discontent boiled over. Student-led and middle-class protests erupted in cities across Venezuela, fueled by frustration with soaring crime, inflation, and chronic shortages of basic goods. Demonstrators clashed with security forces as barricades of burning tires sent up plumes of smoke in Caracas and other cities. Maduro responded with hardline measures. He ordered mass arrests and deployed the National Guard to disperse protests. When a prominent opposition leader, Leopoldo López, urged more people to rise up against the government, Maduro's police arrested him and charged him with inciting violence. Over the spring of 2014, at least 40 people, protesters, bystanders, and security officers, were killed in the unrest. By mid-2014, the crisis subsided, protests waned, and many of Maduro's core supporters in the poorer barrios remained loyal. Feeling more secure, his government went on the offensive against dissent. That summer, several opposition mayors and other outspoken critics were jailed, sending a clear signal that open defiance would not be tolerated. Within the ruling United Socialist Party, Maduro also tightened his circle. He aligned with the most radical civilian wing of Chavismo, often with Cuban advisors in the background, and marginalized generals or officials seen as disloyal. Unlike the loquacious Chávez, Maduro lacked a natural charisma and struggled to inspire the same fervor. In one instance, he broke into song on live television to promote a message of unity, but the spectacle drew widespread ridicule. Even allies privately cringed at the performance. Still, Maduro maintained control through loyalty and fear. His appointments to key posts signaled that the Cuban-influenced civilian cadre had his ear even more than Venezuela's own military brass. Maduro also tried to borrow from Chávez's folksy playbook, speaking for hours on live TV and even dancing or singing to rally supporters. In one televised event, he broke into a rendition of John Lennon's Imagine as a call for peace, a gesture met with both cheers and derision. Although lacking Chávez's oratorical flair, Maduro strove to cast himself as a leader who could laugh, sing, and fight for the people all at once. Meanwhile, Venezuela's economy was entering free fall. In 2015, oil prices collapsed to a fraction of their former highs, a devastating blow for a country that earned the vast majority of its income from petroleum. Production problems worsened the situation. Venezuela's oil output had plummeted due to mismanagement and underinvestment. By 2016, the government was printing money to cover deficits, and inflation was among the highest in the world. Ordinary Venezuelans felt the crisis acutely. Supermarkets ran out of staples like flour, milk, and cooking oil. Lines snaked for blocks whenever a shipment of food arrived. Many families could only afford 2 sparse meals a day. Surveys later showed that by 2017, over 70% of Venezuelans had lost significant body weight due to the food shortages, a grim phenomenon darkly nicknamed the Maduro diet. Hospitals, too, lacked basic medicines, causing countless preventable deaths. The once generous social programs of the Chávez era were now a shadow of their former selves as funds dried up. Those who could not endure the hardship began to leave. By 2018, streams of Venezuelan families were fleeing the country on foot, bus, or plane. This exodus of millions of people became one of the largest migration crises in the world, straining neighboring Colombia, Brazil, and beyond. Maduro's government, however, downplayed the situation and frequently refused international humanitarian aid. In 2025, as U.S. warships loomed off Venezuela's coast, Nicolás Maduro remained in power. The world was still asking how he had managed to hang on, and as you'll see later in this video, the answer is buried in everything that happened next. Amid this hardship, Maduro's government tried to shift blame to an economic war, allegedly waged by business elites and foreign enemies. But frustration among the populace mounted. In 2015, voters tried to punish Maduro at the ballot box. The opposition won a landslide in the National Assembly. But every time Parliament moved against him, loyal judges simply annulled its decisions. When lawmakers kept pushing, Maduro went further. He created a new constituent assembly made up entirely of his allies, stripping the elected parliament of power. The move ignited months of street battles, masked youths facing riot police, tear gas, and water cannons, and more than 100 dead in the clashes. Maduro stood defiant, condemning the protesters as fascists and insisting that foreign conspirators were behind the unrest. Abroad, the backlash was fierce. The United States rolled out escalating sanctions and branded Maduro a dictator, and many Latin American governments condemned Venezuela's slide into autocracy. Yet he was far from alone. Cuba sent doctors and intelligence advisors. Russia and China offered loans and investments. Allies like Bolivia and Nicaragua denounced what they called U.S. interference. Maduro answered every new sanction with the same line: the imperialists were trying to strangle the revolution. In May 2018, Maduro sought re-election for a second term under conditions that heavily favored him. The most prominent opposition figures were barred from running or had fled into exile, and many opposition parties boycotted the vote entirely. As expected, Maduro declared victory, officially winning about 2/3 of the vote, but turnout was low and the election was widely dismissed as a sham by international observers. Countries from the US to the European Union and most of Venezuela's neighbors refused to recognize the legitimacy of Maduro's new term. Still, he pressed on and was sworn in for another 6 years in January 2019, vowing to defend Chávez's revolution against what he called an imperialist conspiracy. For Maduro, winning that vote didn't end the crisis. It only set up the next, more dangerous showdown. Just a few months later, Maduro faced a dramatic attempt on his life. On August 4, 2018, while he was addressing a military parade in Caracas, 2 drones armed with explosives flew toward the stage. One device detonated in mid-air with a thunderous blast, sending soldiers scrambling in panic. Live television footage showed Maduro and First Lady Cilia Flores flinching and gazing upward in confusion as bodyguards rushed to shield them. the president was unharmed. In a televised address hours afterward, a defiant Maduro declared, "I am alive and victorious," and blamed the attack on far-right plotters in Colombia and Florida, home to many Venezuelan exiles. Several National Guard soldiers were injured, but the plotters failed in their objective. The bizarre attack underscored how dangerous Maduro's position had become, and briefly rallied his base around him. But an even bigger challenge to his rule was about to erupt, one that would leave Venezuela with two men claiming to be president. Only days after Maduro's second inauguration, a high-stakes challenge emerged. On January 23, 2019, Juan Guaidó, the head of the opposition-led National Assembly, stood before tens of thousands of cheering citizens in Caracas and declared Maduro's 2018 re-election illegitimate. Citing a clause in Venezuela's constitution, Guaidó swore himself in as interim president of the country. Almost immediately, the United States, Canada, and many European and Latin American countries recognized Guaidó as Venezuela's legitimate interim leader. Overnight, Venezuela had two men claiming the presidency, and the country stood on the edge of a showdown. For a few feverish months in 2019, Venezuela appeared to have two governments vying for control, one recognized on paper by much of the world, and another wielding actual power from the presidential palace. Guaidó galvanized massive crowds with promises to restore democracy and bring humanitarian relief. In April 2019, he attempted to spur a military uprising, appearing at dawn on a Caracas highway bridge alongside a few defecting soldiers. He urged the armed forces to turn against Maduro. But only a small faction answered his call, and the expected rebellion fizzled within hours. Maduro's generals stayed at his side, and government troops dispersed the demonstrators with tear gas. Meanwhile, Maduro painted Guaidó as a puppet of Washington. In a dramatic confrontation in February 2019, Maduro's forces blocked a convoy of international aid trucks at the Colombian border, fearing the aid was a Trojan horse for foreign intervention. Clashes on the bridge left several people dead, and the aid trucks caught fire. Maduro stood firm, proclaiming that Venezuela would not be humiliated by gringo handouts. Despite the intense pressure of 2019, Maduro survived. His security apparatus cracked down hard. Over the ensuing months, dozens of opposition lawmakers and activists were jailed or pushed into exile, and Guaidó's momentum gradually waned. In March 2019, another calamity struck. A massive nationwide blackout left most of Venezuela without power for a week. Cities went dark, hospitals struggled without electricity, and already scarce food spoiled. Maduro claimed the United States had sabotaged the electric grid in an act of electrical war, while engineers blamed years of underinvestment and neglect. The blackout became a vivid illustration of the country's collapse. And yet, by candlelight, Maduro's administration persisted, enforcing order through curfews and broadcasts on battery-powered radios. The following year, an odd coup attempt underscored Maduro's staying power, and the lengths some adversaries would go to unseat him. In May 2020, a group of Venezuelan dissidents and two former American Green Berets launched a small armed incursion on the coast, hoping to ignite a rebellion. The operation, dubbed Gideon, was foiled almost immediately by local fishermen and security forces. Maduro announced the attackers' capture on television, gleefully displaying their weapons and US passports, and citing the botched raid as proof that he was under constant attack from foreign imperialists. Over time, the opposition's parallel government project lost steam. In March 2020, the US Justice Department took the extraordinary step of indicting Maduro and more than a dozen of his top associates on charges of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking, even offering a $15 million reward for information leading to his arrest. Maduro mocked the charges as a farcical cowboy bounty, but they underscored his status as an international pariah in Washington's eyes. That same year, his authorities held elections to a new legislature stacked with pro-government figures, effectively nullifying the opposition-led National Assembly. By the end of 2022, even the opposition acknowledged the failure of its gambit. The main opposition parties voted to dissolve Guaidó's interim government and refocus on negotiations and upcoming elections. Maduro, having outlasted his foremost adversary, remained firmly in control. He often reminded Venezuelans that he had endured everything from violent street protests to assassination plots and never yielded. In his telling, the steadfast captain who kept the ship of state afloat through every storm. And this is where you start to see why, even in 2025, with open talk of a possible US operation against Venezuela, removing Maduro is still so difficult. One key reason for Maduro's durability has been the support of foreign allies who never abandoned him. Cuba provided intelligence advisors, doctors, and security strategists. Russia invested in Venezuela's oil industry and offered diplomatic cover at the United Nations. China became a major lender and buyer of Venezuelan crude. Iran quietly shipped fuel components when refineries were near collapse, and Turkey turned into a hub for Venezuelan gold trading. With leaders like Bolivia's Evo Morales and Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega, Maduro cultivated a club of like-minded presidents who praised one another and condemned US sanctions. These partnerships kept Venezuela's economy breathing, and its armed forces, equipped even as much of the West, shunned him. By the early 2020s, the diplomatic tides in Latin America had shifted in his favor. A new generation of left-leaning presidents took office in neighboring countries and chose to re-engage with Caracas. Colombia's Gustavo Petro reopened the long-frozen border and restored relations. Brazil's Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva welcomed Maduro to a regional summit and downplayed talk of a Venezuelan dictatorship as a hostile narrative. Even US officials quietly traveled to Caracas in 2022 to explore a possible thaw amid a global energy crunch. Maduro also deepened ties with China, visiting Beijing and signing new energy and technology agreements with President Xi Jinping, whom he lauded as a trustworthy big brother. After years of isolation, Maduro was once again being treated as a legitimate head of state by powerful partners abroad. At home, Maduro also sought to broaden his base by appealing to faith and traditional values. The man who once dabbled in Sai Baba's Eastern teachings now publicly embraced Christianity in his public discourse. He declared Venezuela a deeply Christian nation and began forging close ties with evangelical Protestant churches, a fast-growing segment of the population. Starting in 2019, his government sponsored public events honoring evangelical pastors and provided funding to remodel thousands of churches and religious meeting halls. Maduro portrayed himself as a God-fearing leader on a mission to protect the family and morality. This religious pivot was a calculated move to shore up support among socially conservative Venezuelans who might have felt alienated by the socialist government's earlier clashes with the Catholic Church. By aligning himself both with Catholic symbols and evangelical networks, Maduro tried to recast his image from hardline ideologue to a more reassuring, paternal figure. Underneath the propaganda, some economic adjustments were easing the crisis by the mid-2020s. Maduro's government quietly relaxed price controls and allowed US dollars to circulate, which helped goods reappear in stores. After years of hyperinflation, the currency stabilized to a degree. Oil production inched up from its nadir, with help from foreign partners, providing a bit more revenue for the state. These changes led to a fragile and uneven recovery. By late 2023, polls showed Maduro's approval rating climbing to around 29%, still very low, but no longer in the single digits. He began speaking about moving Venezuela from resistance to recovery, portraying himself as the steady hand who endured the worst and could now guide the country toward better days. As one political analyst observed, Maduro was rebranding himself as the candidate of stability, the man of order and peace who survived COVID and the interim government, in preparation for the next election. In October 2023, Maduro's government and the opposition signed an agreement setting terms for an internationally monitored presidential election in 2024, a breakthrough facilitated by negotiations in Barbados. In response, the United States announced it would temporarily ease certain oil sanctions, the most significant rollback of sanctions on Caracas since the Trump era. Washington made clear the relief was conditional on Maduro following through with electoral reforms, but the gesture marked a dramatic shift from the previous maximum pressure campaign. Many saw it as a recognition that Maduro's government was there to stay, and that engagement, not just isolation, was now guiding U.S. strategy. As of November 2025, Nicolás Maduro is still the president of Venezuela, defying those who once predicted his imminent downfall. He has weathered attempted uprisings, international isolation, and a profound economic collapse, yet remains unyielding at the helm. The United States, which once vowed to see him removed, has been forced to adjust its approach. In fact, late 2025 brought hints of a diplomatic opening. Even as a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier prowled near Venezuela's coast as a show of strength, officials in Washington suggested they might consider direct talks with Maduro's government. After more than a decade in power, Maduro projects confidence that he will continue to rule. Each day, he walks into the Miraflores Palace, beneath Hugo Chávez's gaze from a portrait on the wall, and the former bus driver who took the wheel of a nation steers it onward through uncertain waters, convinced that history and the spirit of his comandante are on his side.